Hello, welcome to today's planter session, The Perils of PK, Pastors' Kids and Nurturing Their Faith. Of course, this is brought to you by Geneva Push, as we do every month here at the planter session. My name is Ben McKecken. I'm going to be your moderator today. We're actually recording today's presentation, and we're going to make a link available to the resource that we get at the end of it. We're going to make that link available to you via email in the next couple of days. Because this is an interactive webinar planter session that we're having here today, we encourage you very strongly, as you listen to our speakers today and you've got questions for them, you can send them through via the control panel in front of you. Send those questions through and your questions will be dealt with at the end of today's session. And also, while we're talking about the planter sessions, go to genevapush.com and check out the vast amount of resources that we've got there. Go to the resource section, because all the planter sessions that we've done, and we've done heaps of them, are there all ready for you, packaged up to share with you, your ministry team, your family, your peers. There are all these different facets of church planting and serving Christ that we deal with every month here at the planter session. So we've recorded them. They're online. Go and check them out at the resource archive at genevapush.com. Now, before we get on to today's planter session, the perils of PKs, pastors' kids, and nurturing their faith, just want to give a quick thank you to our supporters who make the planter sessions possible every month. Of course, we want to thank Christian Super. They're one of the driving forces behind Geneva Push's planter sessions. Give their employer care team a call and they'll help you set up super contributions for your staff online. It's quick, easy, and best of all, it's super that's invested biblically in line with your Christian values. Go to christiansuper.com.au. And also, we really want to thank EA Insurance for also getting behind the planter sessions. Insurance, it can be difficult to get your head around. You might even think it's a little bit boring, but we all know it isn't, and we need it. If you want to get sorted on the fronts of public liability or building insurance or property or contents or other forms of insurance you haven't even thought of yet, we highly recommend you start with a chat with EA. So go to ea.org.au. Okay, on to the main event. Our host today, we've got Al Stewart in the host chair. He's one of the directors at Geneva Push. I'm about to hand over to Al so he can introduce us to our special guest who are going to talk through this excellent, vital, and fascinating topic of pastors' kids and nurturing their faith. Over to you, Al.
Thanks very much, Ben. Nice to be with you, folks. Our two special guests today are Cathy Tucker and her son, Luke Tucker. Quick introduction. Cathy became a Christian while she was at high school, and she got married very young, at the age of 21. After some Bible college, Cathy and her husband Craig were involved in a church plant in Blacktown. 12 years there in Blacktown, and then left Blacktown, went to Drummoyne Presbyterian, and began a kind of a replant or repotting there. And Cathy and Craig worked pastoral work there for 14 years. Just recently, they've left Drummoyne Prezi. Craig's doing a PhD, and Cathy has been working for a while as a chaplain at the Presbyterian Ladies College in Croydon. So we'll hear from Cathy in just a moment. Luke grew up in the Tucker home. Luke's currently studying English, history, Latin as part of an arts degree at Sydney University. Next year he plans to study honours, which would eventually lead to being able to be a teacher. Luke's also working part-time with the chaplaincy team at Scots College and involved in Chapel Hill Presbyterian Church in Rozelle. So Cathy and Luke, great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Excellent.
Okay. Now, Cathy, when I add up those numbers, it's quite a while in ministries, at least 26 years there. We're talking about kids and faith and ministry experience. Can I ask you, just kind of overall, those 26 years of ministry experience, were they a positive time for the family, for your kids as they grew? Do you look back and think, you know, that was all positive, fun and games?
Yeah, Al, can I correct you? I actually married, it's even worse than that, I actually married at 19 and a half.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah. So we actually started church planting when I was 21. So I reckon generally I'd say yes, it's been positive. I think it's been a really great adventure. I can't remember his name, but a friend of Craig's at college basically said that he thought that living as a Christian was being on an adventure for Jesus, and that's really stuck with me. And I think we tried to bring up our kids having that kind of attitude, that it was just going to be an adventure we'd be on.
Okay. All right. An adventure for Jesus. Yeah, okay. Luke, what do you think? What was it like growing up in a ministry family? I guess it's hard to compare it, isn't it, if you've only ever known that family? But was it an adventure for you? It's been a positive experience as you look back?
Yeah, I think that's probably, when I've been reflecting on it, that's been my first thought, is I'm probably the person who's least aware of all the expectations and kind of thinking behind being a PK, because it's the only thing I've known. But thinking back now, I think lots of great things. I think an adventure is probably the right way to describe it. The things that I've loved about it, they have been the things that kind of do feel a bit adventure-y. So getting to kind of always have different people over and doing exciting things. They've been really good. And kind of having an inside eye into what it looks like being in ministry. That's been, something that, looking back, was unique, but it was something that was really great. I really appreciated. And I mean, there were hard things too. And I think looking back, I'm more aware now that they were things that were because I was a pastor's kid. But I think in the moment, I probably thought that they were just things that most kids experienced, like getting on with your family and like not knowing what to do with what your dad does and kind of finding that a bit annoying sometimes. Yeah.
Do you mean not knowing how to explain to people what your dad does, or how do you mean there, mate? How did you relate to Dad's job?
Yeah, sure. So I think I just thought that everyone's dads kind of had a job, and my dad just had a normal job like everyone else. But as I got older, I realised that he didn't. And kind of explaining to my friends, they didn't quite get what it was like to be a pastor.
We actually had a conversation about this last night in preparing, and I've always thought it's a great asset for me to be able to, in social situations, someone says, oh, what do you do? What does your husband do? And you say, oh, he's a Presbyterian minister. And they say, oh, what's that? Blah, blah, blah. And I've always thought, oh, what a great entry point into speaking about the gospel. And Luke was saying last night, it was always something that made him weird, was when other people's dads were, doctors or merchant bankers, he had to say, my dad's a Bible teacher. And I'd always thought that was an asset, but Luke was saying, oh, that was something that marked him out as weird from the get-go.
Yeah. So I think my friends didn't quite know what that involved. So even like a year ago, I was having a chat to a friend who he asked me very seriously, so when it's not Sunday, what would your dad do? I get on Sunday you have a job, right? You go and you run church, but what is he actually like? It's not that hard to you rock up and you say stuff for 20 minutes. What do you do for 5 days during the week when you've got your job? When
Sophie was about 2.5, they had that thing at preschool where you find out what does your dad do. And apparently Sophie said, she stood up very sensibly and they said, what does your dad do? And she said, he takes people into our back room and talks at them.
Well, there you go. Ministry. That's what it is.
He said, no, you talk at them, so.
Yep, that's it. She sorted it out. Yeah. All right. Now, Cathy, how do you've been involved in the 2 church plants? How do you reckon it has impacted your kids? Now, you've got your family bigger than Luke. How many kids in the family?
Just the 2. So we arrived at Blacktown when I was 21, and I had Sophie at 23 and Luke at 25. And I was actually one of the older mums in Blacktown Hospital. They said, oh, we love having older mums. So I was actually completely in the zone to be church planting in Blacktown. So I think one of the things that made it, easy for Craig and I was that we were the right demographic to be church planting in Blacktown. And we were in new housing areas where everyone was like us. Obviously, most people weren't obviously Presbyterian ministers, church planting, but people were moving in with little kids. We shared clothes with other families. When our cars broke down, we gave each other lifts. There were millions of little kids. We were, in a sense, probably the most wealthy people in our congregations with the most stable employment. So Sophie and Luke, I think, had a really great experience of the initial church plant, and they were so little they didn't know what the hard things were about church planting. They just thought it was party central. There were always other kids in the house. Sometimes they were frustrated that they had to share their toys, and but it became commonplace that on a Tuesday morning, 15 women would turn up with 30 kids and just rampage through the house. And I think the kids just thought, yeah, party central, this is great. When we arrived at Drummoyne to do a church plant, all of that changed. That was a huge gear shift, and I think it's had quite a lot of rattle-on effects for both of the kids in different ways. Luke was 5 and Sophie was 6.5 when we left Blacktown to arrive at Drummoyne. Non-Christian friends said, oh, that'll be so much easier for you, it's such a nice area. I think the kids definitely, for at least the first 3 years, saw that as a really bad thing that we'd done to them. We'd ripped them away from a school that they loved, a friendship group that they loved, a church which was just full of little kids, to come and church plant, and they were on their own. So I think...
Wait a minute, Cathy. Let me ask you, the kids are 5 and 6 years old.
Yeah.
Don't they reform their life in 10 minutes, make new friends, all that kind of thing? Or was it that wrench, even at 5 and 6, was significant? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I remember we had a conversation with them before we left Blacktown. I remember we were reading through one of the Gospels about the idea that Jesus says, birds of the air have nests and foxes, have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And I remember one of the kids saying, is that a bit like the fact that we're going to go away from Blacktown now because of Jesus? They were already doing the maths on working through what was the reason that we were leaving Blacktown to go to Drummoyne. And we explained that the reason we had to leave Blacktown was because after 10 years, it was time for us to leave so that other people could come and take church to the next level, and that we had to go to a place where there wasn't someone who was able to teach the Bible to people, and that's why Dad needed to go. About 18 months after we arrived at Drummoyne, Luke came up to Craig and said, I think that so-and-so could actually do the Bible. We can go home now.
18 months.
Yep.
I might also throw in, it got more of a factor as we got older. But I think, Mum, what you said about demographics was a big factor for me. Like at Blacktown, there were lots of families and lots of kids my age. Whereas when we moved to Drummoyne, we kind of moved just before a big demographic shift in the area where lots of young families moved in. But because we were
The vanguard.
we were the early people that moved in. I was in a bit of a demographic black hole. There weren't many people my age, and so when I was at kids' church and then at youth group, max maybe 2-3 people who were kind of around my age growing up, which was really hard. Just because I wanted to have Christian friends my age, and they just weren't there. Like I could talk to people older than me, and I could talk to people a lot younger than me, and like both those things are great. But it was hard because we were moving to an area with lots of exciting things happening because it was like growing and demographics were changing, and there was lots of like need for the gospel there. But that need kind of necessitated me not having many people my age.
Right. I'm just surprised that at that young age, I would have thought at 5 and 6 you wouldn't notice that change as much because you're so much still within the family. I'd expect that when you're a teenager, but that happened that young. Kathy, is there anything you would have done differently with that move there?
Can I just say as well, I think part of the problem with the kids was they, in a sense, freeze-framed Blacktown, and that became the glory days. And so it was almost like everything bad that happened at Drummoyne, or if they got in trouble for breaking a window, or if they had to eat broccoli for dinner, it was I think in their heads this would never have happened in Blacktown. And I don't know whether other families do it, but I think certainly for both of my kids, they did have that kind of sense of anything bad that happens now is because we left Blacktown.
Yeah. I mean, I think I reckon I'd probably push back on that a bit. Like, I reckon there was, like, a bit of trauma moving. Like, I've got a pretty vivid memory of holding on to a drain pipe at Blacktown the day we moved, refusing to leave because Drummoyne was scary and foreign, and I loved where I lived. But, like, I think once I got settled in at school, it wasn't a big deal. Like, I think the move, because we were so young, was, like, the stress and the trauma of the change was probably a lot less than if we had have moved a bit later. Like, I think it was hard at the time, but I reckon we did get over it. Like, maybe not in 10 minutes, but like, we did get used to Drummoyne, and I loved it.
I think one of the things I wish I'd been a bit more aware of is moving from a lower socioeconomic area to a higher socioeconomic area. I think the two things that I did notice was they went from being the smartest kids in the school to just being middle of the pack, and I think that was a bit of a shock for them and took them a while to kind of sort out. And I think the other thing was they went from being the wealthiest kids to the not wealthiest kids, and that was also, I think, a bit of a gear change that we kind of had to talk them through.
Yeah, okay, that's right, because the denominational minister's salary and living standards kind of the same across the whole state, but communities vary so much.
Yeah, so the kids were really packed off when they moved to Drummoyne. Why don't we have heated seats in our car? Was a question for a while.
Why don't we go on ski holidays?
Yeah.
Was my question.
And so it was part of helping the kids to do the maths on, that this is a privilege to serve Jesus, but to talk them through the pros and the cons. I think one of my big problems generally in life is I do this kind of Pollyanna, let's always find the silver lining. And I think that made change hard because I'd always just be jollying everyone along. Craig was a good counterpoint to that, to saying, no, you need to give kids the freedom to grieve and the freedom to talk about the things that they're frustrated by, whereas I tend to just hear it quickly, shut them down and talk about, but isn't it wonderful serving Jesus, which didn't give them the space to actually express some of the things that they were finding hard.
Yeah. But I reckon, I don't know, like, again, I don't know if, me looking back, I don't know if, like, if you had have both been accountants and we had have moved area, like, I reckon changing schools and that sort of thing would have been a big deal, but, like, I think that we would have gotten over it. Like, I don't feel it was that different to anyone upping and moving with 5-year-old kids, to be honest. Like, I don't think we were as aware of, like, the idea of counting the costs and being missional because we were 5 and 6.5. Like, I reckon we were young enough that most of that went over our heads, and the things that were hard about moving would have been hard on any 5-year-old moving. Like, and it wasn't because we were ministers' kids, but it was just moving. Yes, that's my reflection.
Yeah, changing schools, all that sort of thing is always difficult. Yeah, I remember I went to 7 different schools before high school. Anyway. So now, if I ask Cathy, what if you wanted to try and put those 20-something years of parenting and ministry into perspective? What are some of the things that you've learned? I could ask you, what would you do differently, or what have you learned about nurturing kids and their faith in the kind of they talk about the fishbowl thing of ministry. You're going to give us there's a whole lot of young church planting parents out there with their pens or their keyboards poised now for your wisdom.
Ooh, no pressure, no pressure.
No, not feeling pressure.
Yeah. Oh, look, I've only got 2, so my sample space is very small, blah, 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 but I think...
2 kids rather than 2 points, okay.
Yeah. No, it's just that I have got 11 kids and I can't say, oh, clearly this works. Like I've only got 2. I think wanting to tap into how they're different and not do a one-size-fits-all approach to both of them. I think inviting excellent grown-ups into their world has been a huge asset because, like Luke said, there are some things that aren't particularly linked to being a church planter, and it's important that we don't kind of say, oh, the reason my life is so hard is because I'm a church planter. Some things are just 90% because you're just a human being in a family. And I suppose every Christian should invite excellent grown-ups into their kids' lives. But I think moving to a church where there wasn't a peer group for the kids. See, Sophie, I think, made a really, really good friend just before she left Drummoyne, but she was 17, you know. Yeah. Luke's going to interrupt, pointing at me.
I might just kind of throw my 2 cents in on that. I reckon inviting excellent adults into like a PK's world is like incredibly important because like me personally, I hated having to be lectured by my dad, not just at home and kind of in my private life, but also on Sunday, because he was the guy up the front doing the Bible talk, and he was kind of like in every area of my life, he was apparently the font of all wisdom. And so
people don't like being preached at by their dad. Like you got it 7 days a week, didn't you?
Yeah. And so that was hard, and I think that that made it even more valuable that I could have other Christian guys that I could go to when I had things that I was struggling with or I had big questions. Like I'm sure that Dad would have been capable of answering kind of my tough questions when I was thinking through the gospel as I was an adolescent. But I just didn't want him to be the guy that answered it, because when you're 16, when you ask your parents a question, they've got about 15 seconds to answer it before you get frustrated at them and go off in a flap. Like, so I think for PK it was even more important to invite grown-ups in.
So at Drummoyne, we consciously approached individual people and said, would you be willing to have this kind of like long-term involvement in our kids' lives? Would you try and find creative ways to break into their world? Please don't tell us what you're talking with them about. Please don't disclose what they're thinking about, their doubts, their questions. We want them to have a private space with you where they feel safe to really drop their guard. And we're really grateful that quite a few people still have that role in our kids' lives, and they're still Sophie and Luke's go-to people when the chips are down. When Luke was, I think, about 10 or 11, there was only one other boy his age, and so I approached quite a few men at church and said, would you, on a Sunday morning, hang out with these boys, do creative left-field things with them, and be a gospel presence. And yeah, again, they were really exciting in stepping up. And so there were guys, one guy was a DT teacher, and so for 4 Sundays in a row, he got the kids to build something. There was another guy who played bass guitar, and for a 6th Sunday session, taught the boys how to play bass guitar. You know, that kind of, so doing a little bit of social engineering in the background to push people into their kids, you know, Sophie and Luke's world, but also for me and Craig to consciously step out of their world, because I think Luke said last night, part of the times we did it badly was when he started to feel powerless. Can you tell me a bit more about what that kind of meant?
Yeah, so I think the times when being a PK sucks is when you don't have space to opt in, and you feel a bit like a pawn in kind of some larger ministry game that you don't have much sway over. And so it was kind of cool to have stuff that my parents weren't actually, it didn't feel like they were kind of moving all the pieces in a particular way to try and influence me. Like it felt kind of cool that I could take something and run with it, and I had a safe space that my parents couldn't get at and couldn't kind of influence me. Not because like I hated my parents and I didn't want them to know anything, but like it is a bit much when your parents are in your face all the time.
Yep. Okay, if I could just say, for people listening in the webinar, if you'd like to ask Cathy or Luke questions, you can type them in and send them through, and Ben and I will make sure that Cathy and Luke are able to answer the questions. So sorry to interrupt, guys. You're talking about excellent adult voices speaking into the kids' world. Keep going. What other things, Cathy? What
I
other
reckon
advice?
following on from what Luke just said in terms of feeling powerless or feeling like you're a pawn, I think the number one thing is resist the temptation to use your kids to prop up church structures. I think that's the major thing. If you're going to take home one thing, would be that. It's so tempting to think, I now have some people in my world, and that can be the vanguard of starting this new ministry. So Craig would consciously say, how many kids do we have of this age, and never count our kids in that, so that it would just be a reminder to him and to the other key leaders that we didn't want our kids to kind of be the bedrock on which other things were set, because then if they didn't turn up, they would be open to being criticised for not supporting something. And I think also just in the way that Craig and I approach things, we really, really, really didn't want to see the kids as some kind of extension of our shiny, shiny growing empire. So if the kids wanted to turn up dressed really weirdly to church, fair enough. So one of them went through an emo phase, another one went through a phase of refusing to wear shoes. Do you know, like, fine, you know, but
I wear shoes now.
Yeah, most of the time. But to not think the kids have got to come through for us because, I mean, I've failed in that lots of times. I remember one time I really lent on one of the kids when they were teenagers to come and help me run kids' church because someone was sick. And I honestly can't remember which kid it was, but I was really grateful that they pushed back and said, I am not here to be like your go-to. I don't have to come through for you. And I was really rebuked by that, and I thought, yeah, you're not. I'll ring someone else up. But I think when there are points where your church plant is really, you know, losing traction, it's tempting to think these kids are here, you know, to assist me in meeting my goals, rather than these kids are here for me to love them and nurture them and grow them. And if that means that they don't serve my shiny, shiny life, that's okay. You know?
And I think, I reckon I totally agree with that. But I reckon one of the cool things about being a pastor's kid is feeling like you're in, like you know all the stuff that's happening and you're on the ground as everything's starting up. And there's like it feels really cool to be in the in crowd, like for whatever's happening at church. But I reckon the difference between that being something that's really empowering and really inclusive versus being really onerous and a really negative experience is whether you get the choice to opt in or not. So I love there being lots of things that I could be a part of by my own choice, but I really couldn't handle it if I was expected to do stuff or if I was obligated to do stuff.
So your involvement in church would be as a volunteer rather than a conscript.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the takeaway. I reckon I really loved church. Like almost all of my my childhood and for most of my adolescence, it was really cool, and I really loved all the people. And being part of it was great. And being a PK kind of made that even better in lots of ways, but only because I could choose to do it.
So sometimes we do things behind the scenes. So rather than Craig saying to Luke, would you be willing to play the guitar? We'd actually say to the music coordinator, you know, like, hey, have you thought about that you might want to ask Luke? You know, so that it came from somebody else, and that the invitation therefore was from somebody else, but also it was easier, hopefully, for the kids to say no to that other person rather than us saying, oh, guys, you know how we're really, really stressed, and if more people don't become Christians and give money to church, we'll become homeless, and, you know, that you therefore have to come through for us, otherwise we'll be living in a cardboard box. You know, like, I think kids can pick up that sense of angst from church planners, especially when it's small, that it's down to you.
Yeah, I might just I think that's something that I'm really thankful for. I think that that you and Craig have done a good job of that. Like I might just kind of share something that happened to me like maybe a month ago. Where I was so I used to go to church with Mum and Dad at Drummoyne, but I left because I have a church plan in Roselle, and one of my roles there is directing music. Like I organise it, and one Sunday as I was packing up the music gear, someone was chatting to me about music, and they asked me whether I did stuff at my old church. And I said, oh yeah, I did a bit of music stuff there, and this person looked at me and with a completely straight face said, oh yeah, because you were a pastor's kid, so like you would have been like expected to do lots of things, right? And I kind of stopped and went, what? Like that's like the thought of that being the case was terrifying, let alone that actually being the case. And I couldn't quite wrap my head around this weird dystopia where that would be the expectation that was placed on a pastor's kid, that you had to do more, and it was really like it was affecting that that this person thought that was a completely normal thing, that would be the obligation and expectation of PK.
I think it's a good thing your parents did, but I suspect in many pastors' families the obligation is there. I tell you what, we'll keep going. I'm going to ask you, Sharon, we've got a question here from Sharon. I'd like to come back. So far we've got other adult voices speaking into kids' lives. One size doesn't fit all. Don't use your kids for church structures. Here's a question from Sharon for Luke. Luke, what did your parents do well that allowed you to make your own decision to follow Jesus? And she asked,
sure.
did you go to a public or a Christian school?
Yeah, so I went to a public school from kindergarten to year 6, and then I went to a private school from years 7 to 12. Because Mum and Dad were in ministry, I got given a bursary to go to a private school in the west of Sydney. Yep. And I think one of the thing that I found most helpful was having space to be a complete dingus, to stuff around and to make lots of mistakes. Like I think I would have found it really hard if every time I kind of put a foot wrong, Mum and Dad kind of were there and wanted to debrief it and wanted to chat about it and do a spiritual check-in with me. Like when I was in year 12, I went through a pretty significant wobbly patch, just in terms of how I was living and my faith and everything. And Mum and Dad gave me lots of space, and that was really helpful because when I kind of came through it, they supported me and were there for me, but it was my decision. Like I didn't feel like they were there kind of strong-arming me through it, making sure that I finished kind of being a great Christian, but I could choose to do that. So like I really appreciated the space. And so that's probably the first thing. But the second thing is probably the flip side of that, which is being happy to provide support when I wanted it. And maybe when I wanted it is probably the key to that. When I had problems, I did want support. It was great that they could be there, and I really appreciated that. But it was only when I wanted it, because again, it felt a bit like I was being strong-armed if Mum and Dad looked a bit too in my face, going, "How you going?"
Something that I think Craig was really good at doing, partly because he's developed consciously good skills in time management, and I think in a funny way, time management is one of the essential things that I think church planters need, because if you're managing your time well, when your kid needs you now, you can actually drop everything and be there for them. And I think bad time management means that when your kid says at 11 o'clock at night, I need to talk to you now, you just say, I can't, I've got to get, So I think Craig's time management meant that we called Luke Kramer for quite a while. You know, on Seinfeld, how Kramer just bursts into rooms.
Yes.
Luke would do that.
I didn't actually know that.
Luke would sometimes, sorry to hear that in public, but
this is free therapy.
Yeah. Luke would not talk to us for quite a while about something, and then he would literally just burst into Craig's study and he would start talking. And I think Craig was good at dropping everything and thinking, this is a significant moment that I don't want to miss. I think on top of that, Craig, when the kids were tiny, we had Tuesdays off, because Mondays, if we had off, we tended to fight too much between Craig and I, just because we emotionally didn't have anything for each other. So Craig basically did admin on Mondays and had Tuesdays off when the kids were small, was resolute in taking that time off. And the kids knew that when Dad worked, he worked hard, and when he wasn't working, he was completely present. And both of the kids have reported that looking back, that was something that they had the sense that, yeah, work hard, play hard, worked well for us. But when the kids were at school, it was a cost for Craig and I think I bore the brunt of it, but we decided we would have Saturdays off like normal people, and Craig would put the Bible talk to bed on a Friday night. We would have Friday night and Saturday together as a family, and then he'd get up at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning to reheat the Bible talk. And I think that was really significant in the kids getting the sense that who was most important in our world? Jesus was most important, and it was worth being inconvenienced for the gospel. But then a really close second was, I think the kids felt like that's where they came, that they weren't third after church.
Yeah, like I think it actually, it was a big deal that Dad would be happy to drop things when, like, I missed my bus to get to school. And like Dad is on board, like chairman of boards and things, and like even when I was kind of 14, 15, 16 and not quite aware of what was going on, I still got the sense that Dad had big important things to do that he would miss because I needed his help. And I think that like in the moment you kind of went, oh, like getting to school is a nice thing, but it was more the meta communication that I'm more important than all of that. Like Dad works for the gospel. That's what shapes him. But part of that means that he's there for me. That was.
So right through high school, Craig would take the kids out for breakfast either once a fortnight or once a week. We came to the conclusion.
Together or individually?
Individually, because they used to just eat each other if they were together. They would compete and they would be really evil to each other. And so we attempted to do things as a foursome. Then became clear that both of the kids thought that I was a complete idiot and it was better that I wasn't there. And so Craig met with them, and then we worked out that didn't even work, and so he took them out for breakfast once a fortnight or once a week on their own. That was often, Craig reports, a very frustrating time because he'd spend $50 on a really nice breakfast, and one or either of the kids that week had not even wanted to speak to him. His goal was that he would read the Bible with them and pray with them. But he persisted in doing that because he said, I need to communicate to these kids that Jesus is important and that they're important to me. But he would often come back and go, well, that was a waste of time, I think he persisted in kind of pushing his way into their world. And I think the kids appreciated him doing that, even if they gave him nothing to work with. But I kind of stepped back in terms of nurturing their faith. I prayed for them resolutely, but I really stepped out of their world in terms of being someone who consciously was gospeling them, and left that to Craig, and left that to other people. But I would ring people up and say, can you please talk to this kid, make an effort, they're in a really bad place. Right.
Now, well, wait a minute. Sharon's asked a follow-up question, which is exactly on that. Luke talked about how good it was to get space, especially when he's a bit wobbly in year 12. Sharon asked this question to you, Cathy. Cathy, how hard was it to step back and release your kids to Jesus and not try to control their choices? Was this a gradual process? So my guess is you're a can-do kind of person. Was it hard to kind of let go, step back?
Oh, yeah, really, really hard. But I think I talked to older women, and that's what they said. I mean, Steve Biddulph and all of those kinds of writers as well, just from a secular framework, basically say mothers have to step back from the lives of their children and fathers should step up. So in the primary school years, I think, it's really significant to have a mum who isn't so busy that she's distracted emotionally from her kids. But I think it's so important for mums to consciously step back. There's a New Zealand woman who used to be a juvenile justice worker or something, and she's written a book about creating lovely boys or something, and her big thing is that women try and stay too close to their kids through adolescence when the men should really be stepping up. So I think physically stepping back was important, and I consciously had to do that. And yeah, I'm a control freak, and I wanted to wash their clothes and make their lunches, but I would consciously do what I call considered neglect, which is choosing to step away so that they have to step up and learn to do the things they need to learn. So I would consciously make really, really crappy packed lunches so that Luke came to the conclusion, I refuse to eat those lunches, I'm going to make my own. I ironed his shirts really badly so that he would think I could do that better. So to push him forward. But the thing I found hardest was not relinquishing control, but feeling like I was being treated like an idiot, and I was, because I was consciously not wanting to be the cleverest person in the room so that my kids would step up and become grown-ups past me. And I think it's really nice, we're coming back full circle so that both of the kids, I think, are respecting me a bit more now. But there were lots of times where I felt like I was just being treated like I was vaguely retarded.
Now, Wade, is it sometimes that Dad needs to step up and make sure Mum is respected? I've heard that. I've heard of a family where hypothetically that was a problem. Is it sometimes that Dad needs to do that?
Yeah, that was my. There were kind of when Sophie and I were going through adolescence and things were fairly emotionally tense. I think it probably was fair to say that we both did. We both kind of looked on Mum fairly disdainfully. I don't know why. I don't know if that's a trend that most adolescents do, or if that was just because Mum has a really annoying teacher's voice, or I don't know. But there were a couple of moments where Dad really stepped up and backed Mum, and it was a really great thing to see, just because you kind of went, oh wow, that's kind of like, for me, that's what a man does. He looks after his wife and he goes into bat for her, but like I think it probably also set the standard well.
I think if Sophie was here, she'd have a different take on things as well, because my dynamic with Sophie was really different to my dynamic with Luke, and vice versa. Craig with Luke and Craig with Sophie. I think
I was closer with Mum, and Sophie was generally closer with Dad.
Yeah, Luke and I are more similar in personality. Craig and Sophie are more similar, blah, 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 but she's not here to defend herself at that point. So I think in terms of Sharon's question, did I actually step out of the equation completely? No. I was pulling strings behind the scenes, but in a way that gave, I think, Luke and Sophie the sense that I wasn't in their faces, but I would ring people up and say, please take Luke out for coffee, or please hang out with Sophie and take her out. We were actually house sharing with a family when Luke was going through his wobbly patch, and that was fantastic because the guy that was living with us really sniffed the breeze and spent time with Luke, and we didn't actually ask him to do that, and I think Luke was smart enough by that stage that he would have picked up if we had set them up, whereas I think that guy just stepped up and knew this is what this kid needs. And so strangely enough, house sharing during Luke's HSC, which should have been a nightmare, was actually excellent. And so again, it was partly me being vulnerable enough to have another family living with us meant that I benefited because another person was in their world who loved Jesus and did it so well.
Yep. Okay. Is there another one? Now, so far, Cathy, you've talked about one size doesn't fit all, excellent other adult voices, don't use your kids for church structures, time management, like work or not work, clear boundaries. Got any others you wanted to, was there any other points you wanted to give us?
Try not to be a hypocrite and apologise when you're a hypocrite. I think when you ask, in my work with teenage girls, when you ask them what would you like to be different in your family, and all the research backs this up, they would basically say, I would love it if my parents actually apologised when they were wrong. So this isn't, again, something that's distinctive for church planters. I think it's what every adolescent wants from their parents, is a sense of admission of guilt. And sometimes teenagers will punish you with that for weeks, if not months, and keep bringing it up, but it's still really important to do. There was a time when the kids were tiny and I answered the phone and I gave some lame excuse for why I hadn't kept up with a commitment, and when I got off the phone the kids said that was a lie, that I my memory was, it's a long time ago, but my memory was kind of like, shut up, don't be so rude, go and clean your room. And then later I actually kind of thought they've got a really good point, and I went in and said, you're quite right, I made that up because I wanted to cover my own back, blah, blah, blah. I think those little conversation by conversation, in showing your wobbly white underbelly of not being a good person, forces them to do business themselves with their own sin and forces them to then be exposed to God's grace. I think as a leader, if the kids feel like mum and dad have got, they're like James, you know, a double-minded man, or that they're two-faced, I think that pushes them into an angry hypocrisy kind of place. But I think it also means that they're less likely to run to Jesus for their own sin as well. There was a night when Luke was probably only 3 or 4, and I was sitting on the end of his bed. We'd read the Bible and we were praying, and I said, is there anything you think that we should be praying for? And with a very straight face, Luke said, we really need to pray about your temper. And again, I just felt like slapping him. You know, how dare you? The reason I have a bad temper is because you and your sister are such hard work. You know, like, you're pressing my buttons, you little slug. You know, like,
but you used to have got a bad temper, that's right.
Yeah, and so that was a significant moment, and in God's kindness, I held myself in check and I said, great, could you pray that for me? Do you know, but I think, yeah, like, trying not to be a hypocrite and being honest about your own sin hopefully pushes your kid to think this is how you do life. You actually are honest with God about your own sin, you know, so hopefully living out that grace kind of emphasis. But, yeah, that's a really hard one to do.
Okay, and they are ready to forgive you when you ask, aren't they?
No, they hold it against you.
That's not the answer we needed, Cathy. That's not the answer.
I think why is it that all the research says that parents don't do it? I think it's because kids don't respond graciously. They don't say, and isn't it great that Jesus has died for that sin? They go, excellent, I'm going to use this in my arsenal. Next time I'm angry with you, I will remind you of that. And so that's the reason why we don't do it as parents, but it's exactly why we should do it.
I think, like, as we've been preparing for this, it has felt a bit like a case study in all the ways that Luke's been a jerk in the past, and like, that's probably fair enough because like, I was an adolescent, but I suppose the thing that really struck me was that if you're raising an adolescent, those years are going to be a net loss for you. Like, you're not going to come out of that going, wow, I feel like I really got more out of it than I put in, you know, like all that emotional energy and care.
Okay. Now I have, well, Cathy, that's hypocrisy. Try not to be one and apologise when you are. I've got a question for you. Just hypothetically, I've heard in very, very rare occasions there's conflict in churches. I know it hardly ever happens almost, but hypothetically speaking, if there was conflict within the church, how did you and your kids relate with that? Did you ever tell kids it was going on? Did you try and shield them from that? How did you deal with that?
I think that was an extension of Craig's bigger strategy, which was he would only tell me conflict things that directly affected me or I needed to have a role in helping to solve. So if there was something big going on that I couldn't fix or I didn't need to know about, he didn't tell me. And I think that was really helpful because it meant that I breezed up to people who were slagging off other elders or something. I was oblivious to it and super friendly, and it was only after they looked terrified that I thought, oh, there must be something going on in the background there. I think that was the extension that we passed down to the kids was, unless it directly affected them or they actually needed to be part of a solution, we didn't tell them. That changed as they got older because we didn't want them to feel like somehow they were outsiders to our world because by definition our world, home and work, blended in together. So in some ways it would be disingenuous to not let them in on why we were obviously sad or mummy had water coming out of her face. Do you know, like, it was important that we treated them with dignity, that they picked up that there was something going on, and we thought there are times where we need to tell them enough that they don't feel frightened of what's going on, because otherwise they think mummy and daddy are getting a divorce, they hate each other, rather than saying, Daddy's just been to a meeting and some people spoke really unkindly to each other and that's made us feel sad, you know, and that normalises the fact that, oh, that's what sometimes happens in Christian churches. But I think we worked out really fast that talking in code in the card never works, because kids work it out too fast and they would go, oh, they're talking about so-and-so. And I think that's really unfair to the kids, that they become privy to stuff that they shouldn't know about. But Luke's, last night.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was nice is that Mum and Dad included me in their work. Like they were quite happy to talk about issues they had to deal with, and things that were hard at church. But it did feel like a very difficult line to walk in terms of telling me too much and not knowing if I could keep a secret. But I think I had to learn very quickly how to be wise with what I said and how to interact with people at church. And that was probably something that was hard, looking back, especially in kind of my mid-teens, growing up, getting older. Like I can remember being in a social situation after church where people were gossiping about someone, and kind of I was standing there going, I know that this person has postnatal depression. How do I deal with that? Because Mum and Dad included me in on that, and it was really great. It helped me understand how ministry worked, and like I got where Mum and Dad were coming from. I got what made them stress. But from my perspective, that was definitely there was definitely a learning curve there, knowing what to do with that information.
And I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it's just a case by case. What do we need to do so that this kid gets a better understanding of how sin and grace works in God's world, and how do we also communicate that this kid is really important to us in our wider world of leading a church. And I know that sounds woofly, but I think it's a case by case. So there's a place for a 16-year-old not being told anything about a particular situation, but there's a case for a 16-year-old being sat down and saying, I know that you've sniffed the breeze, that there's something big going on. Can I tell you the bare bones of it? Because this is going to go on for weeks and it's going to really impact our family. Can I just explain to you why it's likely that we are going to be short-tempered, but you know, this goes no further.
Or knowing why, knowing the reason that you guys have to get up and leave halfway through dinner and not finish your food because you have to go and talk someone down or be part of a crisis situation.
So again, can I just say, again, strangely enough, time management comes into that, because if you're managing your time well and not taking on too much, you've got the presence of mind to be able to stop and say, okay, how are we going to play this crisis so that our kid doesn't just get dragged along for the ride?
Yep. So it's in terms of it's just being deliberate and thought out in terms of what the kids hear, what you tell them, rather than them overhearing without any thought about it.
Yeah, or being told nothing and just assuming the kids will just suck it up and stay on board.
Yeah. Okay. You know the kids growing up. You know the kids growing up thinking the church hurts mum and dad. That's the yeah. Now, we've got and Luke, we've got 7 minutes left. Or in fact, Ben tells me 5 minutes. Cathy, can I just ask you, or Luke, we'll have a lot of church planters listening, usually with little kids, maybe even preschoolers, that kind of thing. Have you got 2 or 3 things that you'd say for those who are just starting out, little family, small church plant? What advice would you give to those kind of just getting started?
So just random bits and pieces?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you think, whatever Auntie Cathy would want to say to those starting families and starting churches as they go. They're 20-something and away they go.
Far out. Luke's got something.
Maybe I think it feels like for me the the older I got, the more I was aware of stuff, and the more that kind of the more mum and dad were playing with fire in how they dealt with me. But the younger I was, like it wasn't kind of like I wasn't as aware of what was going on and all the pressures and things. But I think it was then that they set lots of patterns and established lots of habits in how they did life and how I was a part of that was really helpful. I think it even though there was probably less at stake and I understood less of what was going on, it was incredibly important for me understanding how important I was to them and how they were pretty ruthless in loving me at the cost of rearranging the rest of life.
Right, so good patterns in family life. The time management thing comes up again and again. So setting good routines and patterns in family life.
Yep. It doesn't work for everybody else, but we did work hard, play hard. Craig, when the kids were in primary school, enterprise bargained with the elders at Drummoyne to take 6 weeks annual leave and a pay cut because we decided we wanted to have really, really outrageously excellent weird holidays, which was sometimes just stick them in the car and go camping. But we figured if we were going to be the kind of people that hit it hard but really pulled back and had great holidays, so we made that decision. I think change tack as you need to. So Luke was saying he loved it when he was small, that our house was party central, but when the kids both hit about year 5, that started to change. And I remember I've got Sophie's permission to mention this. Her room was right at the front of the house, and there was one day where the doorbell went. I went to answer the door. I glanced into her room, and she had instinctively jumped under her homework table. And after I dealt with the person at the door, I said, "Soph, what are you doing under the table?" And she said, "I cannot handle people anymore." Craig had a big conversation with her in the days that followed, and basically as a family, we came to the conclusion we wouldn't have home groups at night in our house for the foreseeable future. And Luke's recollection is that for the next 5 years, we didn't actually have groups in our home because it was doing Soph's head in. And so part of loving her so that she didn't have to push away from everything was to basically say, someone else will have to have home groups. And again, that was a cost to me because it meant that rather than Craig and I leading home groups together, Craig went off and led a home group in someone else's house. But I think those moments when you make the call and the kid thinks, I've been heard, I think they're significant. I'm very aware that there were lots of points where we missed our kids on that and we didn't have the presence of mind to respond, but Luke's got something.
Yeah, I reckon
we've got 1 minute, by the way, guys. We've got 1 minute. Okay.
Well, I think the flip side is that PKs aren't special. Like we're kind of sometimes it feels like PKs have like an aura around them, and like the light kind of shines out of their Bibles, and they know everything, and they're just these great humans. But I reckon it was helpful, kind of being not being expected anything more of, but also not being expected less of as well. Going, you're just a normal person. I think it's really unhelpful to think that if you're a PK, you're going to be great, but also do whatever you want because you're a PK. Like, I think it was just helpful being treated just by like a normal Christian kid.
Yep. Okay. Well, guys, the hour has gone very quickly. There's so much more that no doubt you could tell us. You've given me 7 points to take away. One size doesn't fit all. Have excellent adult voices speaking to your kids' lives. Resist the temptation to use your kids for church structures. Time management. Work hard, play hard. Clear boundaries in how you use your time. Hypocrisy, and we're against it and apologise for it. Be deliberate in what you share with your kids, especially about conflict. Deliberate what you do or don't. And adjust your home life according to the stages of life. There you go. Lots to think about.
The only other thing, never mention your children in public.
Yeah, not in sermon.
Never ever mention your children in sermons or in public.
Without their permission.
Yeah, without their permission.
Without their permission. Okay, especially don't mention anything that happened embarrassing about your daughter on the internet, right?
That's it.
That would be it. Okay. Cathy, Luke, thank you very much for your time and your wisdom. Much appreciated. And I'm going to hand back to Ben now.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you so much, guys. Wow, in 1 hour we heard, I'm like Al, I'm like scratching down notes and trying to get all those thoughts in my head about perils of pastors' kids and nurturing their faith. And I can't believe how much territory was covered off in an hour. I'm sure you can't either, and I'm sure you'll be very keen to share this with other family members, other church planting friends, whoever you know in ministry that could benefit from this. Well, good news. As I said right at the start, we are recording today's session. We'll let you know of the direct link to it. We'll send an email to you in the next couple of days, and feel free to share this resource far and wide. I would also like to point you, before we wrap all of this up, to point you to the next planter session, because this one was so good. You are definitely going to want to check out what's coming up next at the Geneva Push planter session coming up in October. We've got Give Thanks Around the Country. This is happening on the 14th of October at 11 a.m. You are going to want to be there, because we're talking to 6 church planting couples in 60 minutes about what's been going on for them. They are based all around Australia, and we are hearing from them about what we can all give thanks to God for what they've been involved with this year. That's going to be the next planter session. Head to genevapush.com to register now, because you are definitely going to want to be part of that. And before we do finish up, just want to give another quick shout out, another quick thanks to our sponsors. Thank you so much to EA Insurance. If you want to cover off all the insurance needs of your church plants, go to ea.org.au. And on the super side, Christian Super, go to christiansuper.com.au, and they will definitely help you out. On behalf of Al and our terrific guests today, Cathy and Luke, weren't they great? How honest and open were they about their family life as a ministry family? So thanks to Cathy and Luke and Al, and on behalf of the entire Geneva team, I've been Ben McKecken. I'll be with you next time. Have a great day.